Hello everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to show our work here today. My name is Carlos Vieira, and I will present to you today our multi-agent chatbot developed in the preclinical department in Bayer. So here's a quick agenda of what I'm going to talk about. I will introduce you to the Preclinical Information Center, the PRINCE, and then I will go through the evolution steps that we took to reach where we are today, which is a multi-agent chatbot system, and we termed it the search, ask, do evolution. And in the end, I will talk a little bit about the outlooks and what is coming next for us. Important to mention that what I will talk about today is part of a publication that has just been accepted last week in Frontiers in Artificial Intelligence, and I'll post the link in the chat afterwards, and you can access this paper hopefully in this week or next week. It should be coming out. All right, so let's get into it. The Preclinical Information Center, the vision that we have for the preclinical, the PRINCE, is that it should become a one-stop shop for all the preclinical data that we have in Bayer Pharma. And this is a cloud-hosted platform that has been developed in collaboration with ThoughtWorks in India. And the vision for PRINCE is to tackle some of the key challenges in the field, or to help tackle some of these key challenges in the field. Specifically, the field suffers with lots of pressure to accelerate the drug development timeline and reduce costs, while, of course, ensuring safety and effectivity of new drugs that are produced or that are investigated. And the preclinical department is also heavily involved in optimization of drug candidates before first-in-human trials. This is a generic view of the field. From the data perspective, what we see is that over decades, we have been accumulating different types of data, mostly structured and unstructured data, and they have specific challenges themselves. For structured data, we have different labs working with different systems, different LLMs, with varying pipelines and processes of curating this data, and therefore leading to a fragmented data in different silos. This is quite difficult to work with. And on the unstructured side of the data, we have thousands of documents that are generated for each study, containing hundreds of pages, sometimes even thousands of pages. And the big challenge here is, of course, how do you make sense out of such amount of text? So in the first stage of the PRINCE evolution, we called it the search phase, because this is a stage where PRINCE, as it was a repository of over 18,000 in-house studies with both the structured data and unstructured data. From the structured data side, what we implemented is an automated ingestion pipeline for the multiple in-house data sources that we have. And this incorporates centralized curation and harmonization step in our extraction, transformation, and loading pipeline. That was quite some effort, but only really tackled the structured part of the data. On the unstructured side, we implemented optical character recognitions, OCR, to extract the text from these PDFs. This text has been split into chunks. We have, I don't remember the numbers now, but a couple million of chunks from these PDFs that are saved as JSON files with the metadata coming from the document, meaning we keep the structure of the document, but now in a new format that is computer readable. This text has been embedded into OpenSearch, therefore being used for what I'm going to show next. So at this stage, what we implemented is a search engine that is capable of searching and identifying the study that is relevant for our experts. Therefore, working with the unstructured part of the data still remains a challenge, because only providing this text is not necessarily what exactly the expert wants. They might want interpretation or even associate different documents with each other. That's when the large language model revolution, so to say, started, and we immediately recognized the potential of such a technology for our use case. A key challenge for a large language model that we wanted to develop is, of course, to identify the relevant context, so the relevant chunks and the relevant data that would be used to answer a request from a user. And that's why we implemented retrieval augmented generation to identify unstructured data relevant for a research quest. So I'll just quickly brush through how it works due to time reasons. But what we do here, the challenge here is that we have a couple of millions of chunks from which the chatbot has to identify relevant text. This, of course, is not possible due to token limitations and token overload. So what we try to do is to identify only the relevant ones. And we do this by first filtering the search space. So for instance, if the researcher is asking for studies in red, we don't need to look for anything in studies with dogs. That's what I mean by limiting the search space. And on the side, we implemented a hybrid search using both the keywords that have been generated and extracted from the request, and by expanding the request into 5 similarly semantically questions that are then embedded and used for searching for chunks that are relevant for these expanded requests. So together, this leads to a list of partially relevant studies that are then re-ranked with a cross-encoder model to then come up with the final list of chunks that are probably relevant for the research requests that originally triggered this process. On the structured data side, we developed and implemented a task-to-SQL translator whose function is, and I will brush through this quite quickly again, whose function is simply to translate, so to convert what the user is requesting into a SQL query. And this is done using dynamic few-shot prompting with some SQL examples that have been in-house curated. With this query is then used to trigger a search in AWS Athena, where our database with structured data is. And this can, of course, be repeated upon if any errors happen until the relevant structured data is provided. Both of this data is then provided as context for the original request of the user for the large language model to provide an answer. And let me show you how this looks. What you see here is the ask phase of prints, where prints, due to access to both structured and unstructured data, can answer natural language requests from the users. So in this bubble box here, you see the request from a user. It's a user that is is asking if there were any clinical findings in study A and specifies some specific findings of interest. It's now folded here, but this box you'll see later, it's the process that is happening behind the chatbot. And as this process identifies a relevant context, these are displayed to the user immediately. And this is, of course, to keep transparency and increase trust with the user that is trying to understand what the language model comes up with an answer to the request. And to be clear, so from this simple request, you can immediately identify that the request is specific to study A, so we don't need to look at any other study. That narrows down the search space by a lot. And it's quite easy to identify which keywords have been identified by the chatbot. And if you look at the answer, it's quite interesting. The answer is quite simple, but first of all, you see the blue dots indicating the reference from which each assertment was collected from. And when you start reading it, you can see some interesting facts. For instance, piloerection, which is described as erected fur. So the chatbot is able to identify semantic meanings of words. And this is why it's so interesting, because if you try to use keyword matching, you wouldn't find piloerection because the text mentioned erected fur. So this is you start to see the power of a chatbot that can interpret the words, not only just match them. This is, of course, not all. The next step of the evolution of our system, we created a mode agent system. So what I just described is what in our current system is a single agent. But the current system is formed by several different agents. So the current approach is that a request from the user is managed by a supervisor that then uses tools or connects with other agents to execute a function. So here, let me go into detail what that means. So first of all, the supervisor will first analyze what is the intent of the question. If it's a simple question or if it's a request for action, which tools should be used, what kind of data would be requested. And the supervisor also know at which state of the process the pipeline is. It will then forward the request to the researcher, which is pretty much what we just saw before. The researcher will then identify the relevant data to be retrieved, pass back to the supervisor, that then passes it to a reflection agent, and who judges if the extracted context is sufficient. This process is repeated several times until the reflection says that's enough. If it has been part of the request from the user, a document planner is called, and this is an agent specialized in planning the writing of documents. This agent has access to an in-house curated library of prompts that I will show in a minute. That's it. The plan is, of course, sent back to a human that can immediately interact with the supervisor and provide feedback, providing them a new request or interfering directly with the action of the agent system. Finally, everything's passed to the writer, who then provides the final answer. This is all in an integrated system containing evaluation processes and error recovery techniques. This entire complex of agents is what we call the do phase of Prince, because now Prince is able to, it has a generalizable approach that orchestrates complex tasks that happen in parallel. So again, you see a prompt from a user. I will not spend time reading it, but it's a bit more complicated task that needs interpretation of toxicological findings in several studies and asks for a table or an answer in a specific format. So these are several tasks that a chatbot would need to do. And what you see here is now the expanded logic of the chatbot, and step by step, it's described to the user what the chatbot is doing. So for instance, the first step is to analyze the query and decide which tools to use. In this case, the open search tool was identified. And then study by study, study A, B, and then you would see C below that. The tasks are executed in parallel for afterwards being put together. And as shown again, the selected context is shown to the user, and in case they think one part is not relevant or so on, they can immediately identify that in the context. And the answer is also a little bit more complicated, but not so much, but it's pretty much a table with the interpretations as requested concerning, what was it, tolerability of vehicles in this case. So it doesn't look so impressive at this point, but it did make us realize that this is one step in a longer process. So that's what we considered when we thought about the naming of this phase. We call it the do phase, because the next step that we took is to realize that this process is the same process or similar to what an expert would do when they write a document. So for instance, one of the key documents that is written in preclinical is the investigational new drug, the IND. So what we develop here is a process, is a library containing this tailor-made prompts that specify each section of the IND. So just a few words about IND. It's one of the key reports produced by the preclinical, actually a little bit in later stages, but it's a very long document formed in detailed sections for pharmacology, pharmacokinetics, toxicology, and each one of those has many, many steps. And what we realize is that each of these steps can be thought of as a unit that is solved by what we just showed you above. So in this case, we would be tackling the acute single dose toxicity. The chatbot can go through the studies that are relevant for this section, and following the prompt that we generated, create this specific section. And as we iterated over all the sessions, you could actually write the entire document or a first draft of the entire document. So this is what we did. And yeah, and it works quite well, I have to say. But it requires quite some iteration with our experts, because to build such a library of prompts that are so specific can be quite complicated. But this is why we do we call it the do phase, when we can actually produce results like that. With that, I come to my last slide, just to show you the outlook of what is going on for us now. Oops, sorry. We are, as usual, integrating more of the internal sources that are not yet integrated, but also external sources, including PubMed and literature. We are working on drafting other compliance critical documents. So I'm not going into details, but there are many other documents produced by pharma companies, as you can imagine. And these also have specific structures, so we could implement the same logic here. And the final step that I'm quite interested in personally is that without complete data, even the smartest chatbot, doesn't matter which one it is, cannot find the right document. So we are implementing a technique called named entity recognition, which tries to identify metadata, so study details from the document. And it works. I'm not going to give too many details here, but the way it works is basically we use the chatbot to extract the information that we want. So for instance, if you don't know what is the species is, you can ask the chatbot and he's going to tell you rat. And this we have a pipeline that evaluates this answer and creates custom-made metrics. And using this metrics and compare the final result, this is manually validated by a scientist. This feedback loop, this is a lot of work, and you can imagine thousands and thousands of documents being extracted. But this feedback loop is semi-automated, and as more the scientist curates this data, more the metrics are updated, and therefore simplifying the process more and more. And some preliminary results I can tell you is that we have currently 96% average accuracy of extraction of information for about 40 fields at a pace of 42 studies per hour. So still quite some space to improve, but we are quite happy and excited with our current results, and looking forward to work on this even further. And with that, I thank you for your attention and looking forward to the discussion.